Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday, August 9th, 2023 Planning Board meeting for the Town of Raymond. The Planning Board will come to order. The board does have a quorum. We'll start with roll call with you, Mike.
Mike D'Arcangelo.
Greg Foster.
Robert O'Neill.
Ed Kranich.
Kevin Woodbury.
And Kevin from Zoom. This is a public proceeding, and unless the board specifically votes to go into executive session, you have the right to hear everything that is being said and to look at all the exhibits that are present. Please notify the chair if you are unable to see or hear. The board works from a published agenda and will be considering tonight's items in the following order. We have the approval of the minutes from the July 12th meeting, and then a site plan review with public hearing for the Port Harbor Holdings application, followed by any staff communications or updates and adjournments. In each instance, the burden is upon the applicant to demonstrate compliance with the provisions of the applicable ordinances or state law. All persons speaking, including representatives of the applicant and members of the public, are asked to stand at the microphone and state their name, address, and affiliation with the application. All persons speaking shall address the chair. Any conversations must be held in abeyance until after the board has formally voted. After the board votes on the merits of each application, it will prepare a written notice of decision, because the notice of decision may substantially affect any appeals rights. And also, as a matter of courtesy, the board asks that those attending the meeting with regards to a specific application not leave until the board has completed its discussion. Appeals from adverse decisions must be filed with the Superior Court or as otherwise provided by law within 45 days of this board's decision. Also, to be certain that you preserve your individual rights to file any such appeal, you must be certain that the board records evidence of your appearance this evening. Okay. So our first order of business is the minutes from the July 12th Planning Board meeting. Is there any corrections, changes, additions, deletions? A motion?
Motion to accept.
Motion to accept. Second?
Second.
Seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And one abstention?
Yep, I wasn't here.
We pass. Okay. Our next order of business is the site plan review for the Port Harbor Holdings. This, the application is on the table, so we will need a motion to remove the application from the table and to review it this evening.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there all in favor? I assume no discussion. All right. Done, off the table. All right. Rob, I'm going to ask you to just give us a brief overview to start with of the project for the purpose of the public hearing. Then I'm going to open up the public hearing for comments and discussions. And then after that, we will then talk about anything that it comes up in the public hearing and also any of the details of the application.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Once again, Rob McSorley with Superior Technics, representing the applicant, Port Harbor Holdings, for a expansion of the Jordan Bay Marina. The Jordan Bay Marina, of course, exists on the adjacent parcel. They purchased this parcel, I think it was about 18 months ago, and since we've been working on some plans for expansion of our facility. Of course, we came before you last year. Prior to coming to you, we did go to the Zoning Board of Appeals, because one of the items we have is outside sales and storage, and of course that's a conditional use, and we went through that process and was approved. And then we came to you with a site plan where we were proposing a multi-use building and a use of the site for storage of sail boats and for boats in general. During that process, we came to the conclusion that we were a little over our development rights for the shoreland zone, And so at that time, we asked the board to table the project so we could go back and look at the site and see how we could best utilize it and conform to the standards of the Shoreland District. During that process, we came up with several different configurations, one being the one that we're before you tonight on, where we have a single building that's used for boat storage, and then we have some ancillary site storage for both boats that will be sold and boats that will just be stored. We reconfigured to eliminate a lot of the impacts within the shoreline zone, specifically some areas that were between us and where some of the units or houses from the adjacent development are, creating a greater buffer than we had already, and reducing our impacts so that we were below on both the impervious amount of impact, the total area of impact, and of course we had met the tree count before and we're way below that as for this configuration. Concurrently with that, we have gone back to all the people that we sought approvals from previously, Water District, Army Corps of Engineers, MDEP, and MDOT, and I'll update that during the future process here instead of going through it now. So that's basically in a nutshell. We're before you for a revised configuration of our plan, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thanks, Rob. Is there any questions right now from the board? Okay. All right, then I'm going to proceed to the public hearing. Open the public hearing for comments. If there is anybody that would like to address or have comments, you could proceed to the podium.
Good evening, Planning Board. Keith Richard from Archipelago. I'm here on behalf of Wayne Quagliaroli, Barry McKay, and Allison Sarna from Indian Point. You've heard from them before. You've heard from me before. Pleasure to be here. I wanted to address a couple of issues. I was hoping to hear what Rob had to say tonight before addressing you, but I'll run through the issues that I was prepared previously. Is there a time limit for how long I have here?
Yeah, how long do you anticipate requiring?
I'd just like to know what the time
I would
limit
say
is
if you could do it in about 10 minutes, that would be fine.
I can do that.
Okay.
Thanks. Just helps to know before starting.
And I just, to add there, if you do have some questions later, I mean, we better not get answered. We can do that during the other presentation.
Fantastic. First issue is about the buffering and the landscaping plan. I think that so this was before you in November. There were certain issues with requirements that couldn't be met in the shoreland. The project has been substantially reconfigured to address those issues. And if you look at the current plan, you'll note that the changes and the removal of trees and shrubs and vegetation has significantly changed. Now, that would suggest that there is now a perfect buffer between Port Harbor and Indian Point, and that the Indian Point people should be happy with that, and that's an adequate buffer. But I think that it's actually a little bit misleading, because if you compare the photos that were submitted with the application, particularly the ones without any of the foliage during the off-season, what you'll see is most of the trees that are there, even the ones that are going to stay there now, are older trees. So the first third really is not going to have much buffer that blocks the view or blocks noise, et cetera, coming from next door. So I would also suggest that the current photos that you see are the foliage that we have this season, which I think we all understand is not a typical season in terms of precipitation and growth that we've experienced here in Maine. So in short, from our perspective, the landscape plan really should include more. There are some provisions for some evergreens closer to the parking area, and it looks like there are some deciduous trees planned for buffer up towards the 302 side. We would suggest that there should also be evergreen trees or some sort of evergreen buffer along the southern and easterly borders that would provide a buffer that would supplement the trees that are in that area. And I would point you to section 300.10.5 of the ordinance. Specifically references when you have a change of use that evergreens and specific standards for where they should be planted, how many, how they should be maintained should be applied there. And that there also should be a guarantee that any trees that are planted in connection with the landscape plan should be maintained and replaced if any of them die. Next issue is about the parking. And there's been, I haven't attended, but I've watched the other planning board meetings on the subject. And it's my understanding that there's a suggestion that parking is not an issue based on the data that was collected in connection with the prior approval. My question to the board would be what exactly that means, because there's been a substantial submission by Port Harbor for this application. Most of it, all of it is available online. That's great. But I'm not aware that they have actually posted or submitted for public review the parking data that would support the statement that it's not an issue. So it's just a question mark from our perspective. But more importantly, your ordinance requires 100 spaces based on the standard that applies to this development. You have a almost 20,000 square foot building. The ordinance says you need one space per 200 feet. There's no exception in your ordinance for storage buildings. There is a requirement that when you have an expansion, a major site plan review like this one, that you're looking not just at the use that's proposed, the new development that's proposed, but you're actually looking at the whole site, including the uses that are going to be made in connection with the new development. So that I think we can look at the size of the building and infer that it's not just going to be storing things that would otherwise be outside. It's going to be a building that can and will be used in connection with the other marina uses. And there's a question as to what other uses could be made of it that might change what the parking data suggests for the existing uses. There hasn't been a specific request for a waiver or a showing that shows that the applicant's entitled to a waiver of that requirement. And there have to be very specific findings that are made by the board if you're going to waive that basic standard. It's at section 300-10.6. And there's a number of standards that the board has to make findings on if they're going to grant a waiver of the parking under the circumstances. So just a blanket waiver is not appropriate and that showing hasn't been made. And I touched on this before, but lastly, that this is a major site plan review. So the board really should be looking at the entire site. These are interconnected and related uses. It's not just review of one storage building with eight parking spaces. This is a major expansion that's been going on at Port Harbor Marina since 2020. I first got involved in this case over 3 years ago. And I think that it's fair to assume that this is probably not the last time that Port Harbor is going to be before you asking to make some modification. So I think that it's fair for the board to be cognizant of where we've been and where this is going when you're reviewing this. So I appreciate the time.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot your first name.
Keith.
Keith. Before you leave, just on the landscaping, the buffering. Are you talking about the buffering that's right up, almost borders on 302, the slim area that's down, that is adjacent to their leach field? Is that where we're talking about, or are you talking about the buff? Are you talking
The
about
south and the south and the it's on the south and the east side.
Can we have him come up with a microphone and point on the plan where he's looking?
I think he's
Great idea.
these two.
That's why you're here, huh?
And I think I'm probably not the last person you're going to hear from. Allison, I mean, if you want to, okay.
You need to grab the.
I need to get a microphone for you.
Oh,
I can do that.
Do you mind? Thank you.
So some of the buffer areas that we're concerned about as well is down in this area, and we know the pipeline needs to, remain clear. But just with all of this clearing, there isn't anything additional that's being put into this.
So it's the buffer down at the bottom that you're looking, the bottom that you're looking for. Okay.
What about,
Personal, I guess.
so there's no concern about the buffer on the south?
It says it was supposed to be 30 feet, but I would put a scale rule to that to make sure that that plan is,
Yeah, no,
or that it is
right.
at least the 30 feet
Yes.
minimum that's stated in the copy.
Okay. Let's, while you're there, let's hash out this parking thing, because it was a discussion from the last meeting whether or not we required it, how much we required. What, can you help us?
So
on that?
again, the parking is specific to the use of the building. Now, Keith, or you mentioned that there's no control over what the use of the building is. If they come back, if they change the use of the building,
They have
need
to come back.
to the planning board. So the parking that is being considered here is specific to the use of the building as a storage building. The other alternative is to have them build 100 parking spaces, which is going to be a lot worse for the lake, in that you're going to increase,
Right.
you're going to have a huge amount of increase in impervious area and a lot more runoff and everything else. So the devil's in the details when you start asking for more parking, and that it's going to cause a lot more issues, environmental issues with the adjacency to the lake. So I guess my understanding and interpretation is that the parking that is being considered here is specific to
The
the
building.
use that they've said
Right.
the building is going to be for. If they want to change the use of that building, they have to come back to the planning board
Right.
to change the use and potentially change the parking.
But we had some discussion whether or not a waiver was even necessary.
We did. I can't remember my notes on that. I know I still have something in the memo about a waiver for parking, and I'm not sure if that's a leftover or not. Let me just quickly look at my notes here to see what we talked about.
Well, I'm going to chime in. It's, I think I know what you're talking about. It would be 310.6 performance standards sub F.
Yeah.
So there's 1 through, that's what I was referring to, 1 through 5 are the
You're
specific.
talking about the waiver requirements, though.
Correct.
Yeah. I don't remember the details. I just remember we had a discussion.
We had a
on-
discussion on the first submission.
Oh, that, okay.
And ultimately, the planning board was amenable to the reduced parking requirements. So I think we ended up where we didn't even need a waiver.
Yeah, and I was just wondering, I remember, that's where I thought we were going. I just didn't. Okay, and the other thing on the parking, there was no, the only agreement, there was no agreement to publish any parking stuff out of the last approval. It was to make it available, and Rob, or the Port Harbor Marine, did make it, that parking available to the code enforcement. Code, I know, has sent it out to somebody who has asked.
Okay.
So it has been available.
Oh, I just thought, given this extensive submission, that it was easily could have been included, and there was plenty of, I think that there was a lot of transparency in this application. So the comment was intended to suggest,
Okay,
that.
okay.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Is there anyone else?
Hi, I'm Allison Sarna, 13 Flying Hallway, Indian Point. I have a couple questions, comments, again, not knowing what the revisions were from the last meeting when we went through. Since we're on parking, I'm going to go a little bit out of order. I do just want to comment that the parking study was taken during 2020, during the pandemic, when there was a greater decrease. Yes, a lot of people bought boats and did a lot of outdoor additional recreation, but also with the additional slips that have been put in, I'm sure that the parking situation has increased over the last 3 years. So that would just be something to take into account. Also, in relation to the parking and the area that it is there, I know the grade is going to change somewhat from what it is right now, but the runoff direction, there's the barrier that you see in there, but how much that's really going to deter the water from flowing into the wetlands. So yesterday, we had a lot of rain in, not Raymond. We were talking about that earlier. So I know it's not, not normal. A lot of the plans say, we're planning for the 25-year flood situations. But I definitely, in kind of addressing all of the area, a good portion of Indian Point right now is actually underwater before we've done any of this work or any modifications in the area, where there's a lot more permeable space, a lot more trees. The wetland right now, I abut immediately up to the wetlands, and it's almost at the top right now. And we've had some time to dry out. So concerns about that, and even within the retention area, about monitoring that and making sure that the water levels aren't too high of what is draining into the wetlands if it does overflow, which most likely will happen. Also around the volume of trees, I just have a question in general in terms of the percentage in there. Since the previous owner cut some trees down in 2020 that was approved, is that percentage and previous removal, but not addition of new trees to replace those, taken into account in what the overall allowed percentage is of the space? Like, does a year prior make a difference or not within that?
That's a good question.
Address that, since there were some removals, and I specifically asked because we just had to take a tree down and I'm not complaining about replacing trees for sure, but knowing we have a greater number of trees, right, in the area that we're trying to replace one that we needed to take down that was rotted, just figuring out, okay, so now all of this is being removed, percentage needs to be replaced. Obviously, we're closer in shoreland zone, closer to the lake, but then also, I guess, kind of clarification of the understanding of where that sort of line of shoreland zone ends, right? Is it at the edge of the lake, or is it at the edge of the water for the wetlands that extends further back? Do you understand? So like where sort of the Jordan Bay ends, right? But there's a big substantial portion of a wetland that protrudes back into the, so are we counting how far back it is, 200 feet, 400 feet, based on the edge of the lake, or is it being based on the edge of the water, which is a shore in itself, because it does
I think there's two requirements here. There's one from the shore and one for the wetlands, right?
Yeah, but the zone is set based on the ordinance.
set from
Right.
the edge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's see, wetland buffer. And then I think somewhat addressed, I had questions about any future changes, since, this did change from a multi-use building to a storage building, but still keeping the same footprint, and whether or not intentional or in jest. Every meeting before, Mr. McSorley has slipped and said restaurant or joke if it was past, plan that isn't going through, but just knowing that if there were subsequent changes, right, if this switches to multi-use, it's storage, and then on a different level something else, that would be going before
Right,
the
that would
planning
have to come
board,
back.
right? So I just wanted to get assurance on that. And that's all I have for right now.
Okay. Is there anybody else? Any other comments? Is anyone phoned in, Bill? I think that is a no.
Sandy, anyone phone in?
Oh, Sandy.
You're muted. Sandy, you're muted.
You're still muted, Sandy.
We haven't had anyone phone in, but we have people on Zoom that I can check if they want to speak.
No, well, if anyone on Zoom wants to speak, they can sign in right now.
It's on the screen what to do.
Yeah, okay.
They can raise their hand.
Yep. All right, then I am going to close the public hearing. I did do this a little bit out of order. So if you do have...
This is Barry. I want to talk.
Yep.
Barry McKay.
Yep,
Hello, this is Barry McKay from
Barry
22
McKay.
Indian Point,
Barry
Raymond,
McKay?
Maine. Yes.
Go ahead,
Well, I
Barry.
don't know if you can see me, but
We
I tried
can't,
to turn my
that's
camera
okay.
on. Couple of concerns I have. Number one is the water runoff into the high vegetation wetlands. Right now, it's a nice trickle flow, well, except for yesterday, and it just feels like we've put bilge pollution end there. Excuse me. We've put some bilge pollution in there. I mean, there is bilge coming out of those boats. Now we're going to compound that with warming the water and putting some bacterial, bacteria into the water from warm water. I have concerns about that, but I don't know how to address those. My other concern, my personal concern, selfishly, is I'd like a visual barrier between myself on 22 Indian Point and the boat storage. Last meeting, Mr. Chair, you dismissed me as having cars looking at cars, and now they're going to be boats. Well, that isn't entirely true. There is a parking lot there, but right now there is one car in it, and that person lives right next to the car. No other cars all week. Sometimes a lot on the weekend. But at any rate, in the winter there are no cars in there. We're all closed, and that's when the foliage is gone, and that's when these boats are going to be visible to me. So I'd like to request a visual barrier between me and those boat storage. And that's all I have. If you have any questions for me,
Okay, thank you, Barry. Is there anything else on Zoom that would like to speak? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. I am going to leave the caveat open, though. If you do have questions as we're going through, I did do a little out of order, but I thought it might work better as far as an overview. If this project we've been seeing it a lot. I felt everybody was fairly familiar with it. So if you do have questions going through it, please go forward. Just let me know. All right, so now I will go back to you, Will. If there is any, for any input in your outstanding memo here, which I've lost.
Yeah, so we had a couple additional comments that we included in the memo under section 6. One was related to the retaining wall at the lower end of the lakeside of the outside boat storage area. Just some questions about safety concerns there. I think the wall is roughly about 8 feet tall. So we had some concerns as to whether there might be some need of a barrier or railing system along the top of that wall. And then the other comment that we had was relative to the building. And I couldn't find in at least the information that was submitted, and maybe it was in there and I missed it, but I couldn't find any specific information on the height of the building from the rear and the height of the building from the front. It's kind of it drops down in the back, as we all know, so I was hoping to get some additional input from the applicant on that.
Okay. All right, Rob, we're back to you.
Yeah, first of all, addressing Will's comments, Will did an excellent job reviewing the project and pointing out some stuff through the review process. Based upon the comments, I believe we adequately answered all of them, and then Will came up with a couple additional comments. And to discuss those, the retaining wall, where that is only going to be for boat parking that is only handled by staff on site. There's no public about to be over in that area and whatnot. We prefer not to put any type of barrier there or guardrail or whatnot. We don't really think it's necessary because all we're going to do is park boats adjacent to it, but we will defer to the judgment of the board on that. And relative to the building heights, I thought I had put that in the original submittal. Prior to us coming back to you, we had worked extensively with Alex relative to making sure that we interpreted the code correctly. And as stated, there are two different building heights on the building. And the reason for that being is we have that 35-foot from ground to peak in the shoreland zone. And so that establishes that elevation all the way over to the commercial zone line. And then it's 25 feet from grade to the midpoint when you have a peaked roof. And so we did all the calculations for that. And much to the chagrin of the architect, we told him he had to meet that. And we actually had to do some modifications on the original building to make sure that we addressed that, in addition to some of the architectural considerations that we had pointed out in our presentation last time. But I can more clearly put those in a memo or email and explain that situation again. So basically the 35-foot restriction in the shoreland from grade to the peak, and in the commercial zone from grade to the halfway part on the roof, 35 in the shoreline zone, 25 in the commercial zone. Relative to the items that were brought up, relative to the buffering and landscaping, I believe the part of the code is referring to if a buffer is not currently in place and you have to reestablish it. That is guidance for reestablishing the buffer. The buffer area there's a minimum natural area buffer which we well exceed, and it is quite hardy, you know. So we meet what the code is relative to buffering. Relative to the question relative to the parking and meeting the parking and the requirements for parking the building. Once again, we went over that. This is a storage building. There's nothing in code relative to that. The board does have the ability to waive that. You can go through the individual 5 criteria. I think we will meet all those criteria. Relative to the basis of what we're claiming, originally, when we did the expansion to the marina for the docks, there were statements made that we are over parking the site, we are causing parking problems along 302 Roosevelt Trail, and in order to show that we weren't doing that, we specifically set up a camera system so that we could count or observe all the parking during weekends and major holidays. And we did that. And I do not believe that was during COVID, but the interesting thing during COVID, people didn't have a lot to do during COVID. So they went out on their boats during that time. So the marina was quite busy during COVID. So, but anyways, that which we provided as per that condition demonstrated that we have not a parking problem on the site, nor do we create a parking problem on 302. Relative to the runoff, of course, all of our property flows downhill currently to the wetland. That's the natural course of things. When we develop a project, we have to keep as much as possible, or we do have to restrict ourselves that we're not putting water where water didn't go before. So I can't take and all of a sudden drain it to a different direction, which may impact another property. So when I look at my development, I have to design it such that when I develop it, I'm not putting any more in the peak off in the direction that it went before. And that's what we've done by the design of the systems, is make sure that we meet that peak runoff for, of course, the 3 design storms. Those are what the criteria is. And of course, a couple of years back, those numbers changed because of the update, the rainfalls that you got to use based upon historical data. So we designed those to meet the criteria based upon the current rainfall amounts. There was a question relative to, or a statement that we were putting warm water into the lake. Well, if you know MDEP stormwater rules, very keen on a couple things: water quality and the temperature that you discharge stormwater to a wetland or an off-site water body. And Maine is the most restrictive in the types of BMPs, or best management practices, that you can use. And the underdrain soil filter is one of those, which the water has to soak through a media and soil, which takes and helps take out the nutrients and cools it before you discharge it. There's no more of the old-time ponds that you used to have, a pond with a pipe that stuck out. Well, even on a pond, you have a bench that the water seeps through, and the whole idea behind that is to cool that water on discharge and whatnot. Relative to the volume of trees, we haven't counted any trees down on the site. I'm not sure what trees were commented on that were cut. We're well below the percentage. And I don't believe the rules state that if you cut down the maximum amount or less than the maximum amount that you have to revegetate, unless of course we were doing some buffer, removing a buffer, which we're not removing a buffer. We're leaving the natural buffer there. Relative to change in use, once again, if we want to change this to any other use, we will be back before you. If we want to all of a sudden put maintenance in there versus storage of boats, we'll have to come back to you and say, okay, we're going to change the use of this building. We're going to divvy it up so that we're going to have storage on the back part, and then we're going to do some maintenance on the front side. Or we're going to change it to some other more intensive use. And the whole purpose of that is, of course, so that we don't come back and put in a nightclub, which is going to need, buku amounts of parking, or some type of more intense use that needs more parking. So we know that we have to come back to you on that. Relative to the ongoing development of this parcel, one of the key things is, as you know, that there are triggers for Maine DEP relative to when you need a stormwater permit or when your project triggers what's called a site location of development permit. And through all of the work that we've done, some of it has been considered redevelopment, and there are different ways you count that impervious. And because we have several parcels that are next to each other, we do have to count those individual parcels when we look at the overall project and go to DEP. In the shoreland zone, specifically the lake zone, the trigger for stormwater is 20,000 square feet impervious. We hit that, so we have to comply with stormwater. Relative to site location and development, we have specifically spelled out, and there are emails on record with the DEP that we've shown how much development that we've done over the years, including this. And before we submitted this project into DEP, we got confirmation that we did not trigger the site location of development permit, that we would still be under stormwater law and the Natural Resource Protection Act, because we would be affecting wetlands. So, and I think that was all the comments that I heard, but I'll be more than happy to answer anything that I missed.
Yeah, Rob, would you, water runoff obviously has been an issue, come up a couple of times. Could you give us a, in the interest of everybody, from your site plan there, kind of show us where the water is actually running from and to, and where it's captured, and where it eventually winds up, and how it eventually winds up there?
Yeah, okay, so,
And,
once again,
go ahead, I just want to make sure these ladies can see.
okay. Okay, so the whole site, once again, drains to the wetland and then goes through an existing connection that goes
Sorry, Mike.
to the lake. You okay?
Yeah, I can see.
Okay, so we have to basically collect this stuff up, and there are two percentages that we need to meet minimum treatment for, both impervious area and total site. and that's indicated in our calculation. So most of this site right here will flow into the detention area over here, and a portion of the site will flow directly over across the existing Portland pipeline easement, so that we pick up in Will, of course, reviews. We do a pre and post map, which where we delineate where all the water's going to go, so that we don't have everything come here and say that we're splitting it evenly. So we dictate or show how much of this is going here, and specifically for that amount, we do the water quality treatment for that amount in here, and then we route those 3 design storms in here for those amounts and make sure that we're not exceeding the peak. The same thing over on this side. We take whatever is going in here, we do the water quality for the amount going in here, we do the water quantity or detention for the same thing, and then we look at the whole discharge for the site to make sure that we're not exceeding what had been going out previously.
And then where does the water go?
Goes to the wetland where it went before, and then it goes down through the wetland area here and directly down to the lake.
At the same rate that it would be coming off of the land?
It does not exceed the pre-rate. So before I developed, if I had 5 cups of water going out per minute, after I develop, I can only put 5 cups of water out in that same minute.
Rob, could you just briefly describe both of those treatment practices? BMPs are under drain soil filters.
Yeah.
And just briefly describe, I mean, the majority of the storms, the water goes into those filters and filters down through, provides the cooling that you mentioned.
Correct.
And discharges out through an under drain on those. It's the larger storms like yesterday where not all that water is necessarily going to filter down through, and you'll get some spillover through the outlet control structure, but just describe that briefly, I guess.
Best way to describe this is, I like to consider it as a reverse septic system type design, because you're basically putting water into the ground to get it to flow out. So you have a network of pipes underneath that once the water goes through this media that's 18 inches thick, it sits on there. It takes a while to get through there. One of the things is there's very specific criteria that it doesn't just, it sits there. And so that water quality might come up like a foot high. And none of that can discharge except for going through the ground and then out through those pipes that drain everything. Above that, we capture what's called the design storms. So there's 3 critical storms: a 2-year, a 3-year, 3,
10, and 25.
3, 10, 25. I gotta remember I'm not in Florida anymore. So we put that slug of water over a 24-hour period. We have a program that routes it. And typically what happens with a rainstorm, it builds to a peak and then comes down like that. That's your typical rainfall distribution that we design on. And so we designed for the storage of that above that water quality elevation. And then we have this structure over in the corner, and it may have a little bleeder about this big, so that at the water quality elevation, where I can't drain anything through the structure, I can start draining that excess water. And then I may drain some through that and then some over the structure where the top of the structure is. And that is all restricted. The amount, that's my 5 cups a minute. I can only put 5 cups a minute through that little hole in the side in the top of the structure. And that's for those 3 design storms after I meet my water quality storage.
And then when it comes out at least, I believe, I don't remember if it's on both of them, but you have a level spreader that spreads that water out into the wetland?
Yeah, we come down, on both of these, we discharge through a pipe, and then there's a area of riprap. One of the things we don't want to do is to put a slug of water out there too fast that will erode the land and whatnot. So every place where we discharge, we have a riprap area which slows down and dissipates the energy from that water that's being discharged. And then we have the same thing. There's an overflow mechanism for both of the systems for what's called the catastrophic, the 500-year events, which I don't know when the last one we had, but we've had a lot of large rainfall events. The rainfall events we have, I don't believe have exceeded the 25, so there wouldn't be any additional flow off the site than what was discharged before from them.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Rob, can I ask, do these systems, since they have somewhat of a filtration component, is there a life expectancy? Is there ever a problem with them eventually not working as well?
They could. And actually, I have a brand new project that was built in the last year, and we're already having problems with it. And the problems were that there was not proper stabilization on the site, in the fines from other soil on the site, or if you were to do a lot of sanding here. And one of the things that we take into account is that's why you have a 4-bay. Typically, you try to get things into a 4-bay that collects the sand before it gets onto the bottom of that. Well, every year, two things. We have to look at this after every major rainstorm. If we notice that there's a problem and that there's water not draining out of it, then we need to go in and do something. And once a year, there's major inspections, and we will look at the surface of it and to see if it looks like there is a very fine layer of silt that's on it that will restrict the flow through it. And in that case, then there's maintenance that's going to be required. And typically what you're going to want to do is strip off a couple inches and get those fines out, rototill the top, and then bring in new soil to put over it, and then you reseed it.
So if after this project is completed, and a few years down the road, Indian Point, somebody has a problem with what they think is excess water, they could come to the marina and point that out, and something might be done?
They would probably let you guys know, I'm sure, or NDEP, and then we would have to address that concern.
You would have to, because of why?
If we're in violation of our permit, which says that we need to maintain that system.
Gotcha.
So,
And once again, yearly, part of the report that we've submitted, there is a maintenance portion of that which has to be done on a regular basis.
in addition,
Thanks.
their stormwater permit through DEP is going to have a 5-year recertification process with it. So every 5 years, DEP will send out a letter to the owner applicant, say you need to hire someone to recertify that your stormwater systems are working in accordance to the way they were designed.
Great.
So
Thanks.
Does that pretty much answer your questions on water flow?
I have a few questions.
You have a few more questions now. That more than well, that's not allowed. You can all. No, go ahead.
I just have a couple questions that you might be able to answer easy. So thank you for clarifying some of those. So I wanted to get an idea, you were talking about, it's percolating down into the soil and all of that, but what if there's nowhere for it to go in the soil? If it's fully saturated, like the situation it is right now, we have standing water everywhere. Is there a trigger that there's a pump that would put it into sewer, like a sewer system somewhere else, or divert it from that area so that it isn't still, I'm sure it wouldn't still flow, but it's the water level is going to rise in there. So that's what I was just kind of, is there something that would trigger that? Or also if there are, problems, because it's not just yesterday's rain, right? This has been happening for the last 3 years, that we've had a lot of water runoff issues that we've been tracking. if it continues to be this way, right? Like, is there something that, maybe this needs to be either, I don't know, the space, but like, does it need to be deeper or a different type of system or something in order to be able to handle that so that it isn't flooding us? And then, do you have with you a side elevation?
A what?
Like a side elevation of this that shows what the grade is?
The contour?
Yeah, like the
I don't
contour,
have
I think
plans
was-
on me.
Okay, no, that's, I just didn't know. 'Cause I
They're
was
on- they're in the
curious with
plans.
wall
That are on the web
on the- yeah.
that shows 2 sections of it and a section of the overflow too.
Yep. So that was just, concern if there's nowhere to go, then there still would be some overflow there. And then a comment around the sort of like wall safety in that area, that it wouldn't be the public and only staff parking the boats in there, and that's, fine. And I'm definitely not asking for additional lights, but just checking on like monitoring that, because living adjacent to it, very often there's people, to say people, I don't know, staff, or there could be people coming in after hours, or owners of, or renters of boats or whatever, that are still in that area and kind of, that's like after hours kind of concerns, right? There's no one there that's monitoring some of that stuff. So just safety concerns in that. And yeah, that's it.
Okay. Rob, one more question for you on the buffers and landscaping. Your southwest section, 302, the smaller, thinner buffer that buffers Indian Point, we've talked about that, it buffers their leach field.
Yeah, the
Okay.
15-foot buffer
Yep.
on their
So-
commercial portion.
Yep. So your buffer fully meets, as far as I know, Will, tell me if I'm wrong here, but your buffer fully meets the ordinance requirements.
I believe it exceeds it.
And I can remember from our site walk that it is mostly mature trees in that section. And I think one of the individuals is concerned that when the number of those taller trees go away, that there will be very little visual buffer. I also, if my memory serves me correct, the buffer on the Indian Point side is mostly grass with some scattered shrubs. So I'm wondering if there can be some sort of joint project that you would be willing to discuss with Indian Point on a joint revegetation of that total buffer area. That's not a planning board request because it meets the ordinance. But if you would consider that, if Indian Point wanted to proceed and share in the cost of that, whether or not, saying, you don't need to give me an answer.
We will meet with the
Okay.
association regarding it and have a discussion.
Right. Okay, I think that answers most of the mail.
It does, except this is Barry McKay again. The visual barrier, I think you just addressed it, but my property doesn't abut. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm not an abutter, and I am part of Indian Point Association, but I'm I'm concerned about the wintertime when they're not here. The visual barrier, and again, I think you just addressed that, but I'm not part of what you just talked about.
Okay.
So where does he?
What?
One last thing, I don't know if Wayne wanted to touch on, we've been also coordinating with Wayne relative to questions of the fire rescue.
Yeah, Wayne will get his shot.
He'll get his shot in there.
For Wayne.
But
He's
think-
waiting patiently.
Yeah, I think he,
All right.
I'll
so
let him speak then.
I do want you to do one thing for us, Rob, before you do some other stuff. Would you go to Will's, if you have it, Will's memo? Do you have his memo handy?
I can get it. I had it called up on my digital device here. Okay?
All right. Would you go through the final things that we are still waiting on?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Would you let me know if any of those have come in and or what we are still waiting on?
Yeah, let me touch upon that because we reached out to all of them. Okay, I'm going to start off. I don't think it's on here.
I could read it to you if that.
No, I can see it. Let me just make it a little bigger. First of all, I don't think Portland Water District's on here, but we reached out to Portland Water District, and they gave us a revised service availability letter. Our service actually went down because all we basically on to have is a fire line in the bathrooms downstairs, no bathrooms upstairs.
Okay.
So that's not a big deal. U.S. Army Corps replied to me today. They will be looking at that at the end of this week or beginning of next week.
Okay.
Her comment was that, hey, you have a permit, you're reducing the amount of impacts. We don't see an issue.
Okay.
So, DEP, NERPA, and DEP Stormwater, I'm still waiting for a response back on that. They've had it about 45 days now. They should be getting back to us within the next, well, their time limit is typically a 90 days time limit. We will press them on that. DOT, once again, we did have a connection permit for that driveway. They had issued that. We've asked them, it hasn't changed the location. We've asked them whether it needs to be extended or do they need to issue a new one based upon the changes on site. We have not heard back from them. And I've also inquired about the initial submittal that we made relative to the water mains that we need to cross for our fire hydrant, our fire line and whatnot. Typically, DOT requires their roads to be protected after they do a major project, like the major paving project they did. In that case, we can't just open cut for those lines. We have to go back 100 feet in both directions, mill all the travel lanes, and replace all that. And that's what we've kind of called out on our plans. The initial meeting that I had with the district engineer, he didn't see any issues with that, but they have not issued any formal permit yet on that. We're pursuing that. And then the Raymond Fire Rescue,
Yeah, skip that one. We'll hear from Wayne.
that'll be Wayne. Similar retaining wall design prepared by a main licensed professional engineer. What we require is when they go to construction, the contractor will submit signed and sealed plans that I will review prior to the wall going in. And I think the sunset clause is on there, isn't it? On the site plan from before.
Yeah, maybe it is.
So basically, they're all still outstanding.
What's that?
Basically, they're all still outstanding in the short version to that.
Half and half. Let's call it 50-50.
Where's the 50 that's not?
DEP and half the DOT.
Well, you said there's no response yet from them.
We have an initial permit for the access.
Oh, okay.
But we have no
Oh, I see what
permit
you're
for
saying.
the open cut.
Okay,
So I'm assuming that we have 50% of them.
gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, Wayne.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So we have been in discussions with the applicant since the preliminary plan submission, and we've been working on some language to add to the final plan when it comes before you again. And from what we reviewed, those additions or changes will satisfy our requirements.
So you're happy?
Yeah.
It's hard to tell
The only
sometimes,
other thing, the only other thing would be just in the findings of fact to make sure that the memo from July 31st is a condition that's included in the finding of fact.
Okay.
That's in my,
Yeah, in your thing there.
Um,
All right, the board.
Yeah, I just got a question handed to me from, it looks like John S. on Zoom. He wants to know if the gas pipeline has an easement, which yes, it does. And is the road as proposed behind a building outside this easement? And I believe it is, correct?
Good questions. That was one of the ones that weren't on the list that I was going to fill you in on. We have also reached out to Portland Pipeline. Heard back from Ken Brown. There were 4 items that he wanted to have us addressed. We did address those, and those concerns were One where we crossed the pipeline. When we resubmitted to him, we didn't give him the detailed plan for that. And the question was whether we were still in conformance with standards. We didn't actually change that crossing. That's why the pipe does a 90 over to where we had previously designed. So that's not an issue. There was a comment relative to part of that treatment area to the west of the building is partially within the corridor. They have an old-fashioned easement, which says they basically have an easement. It doesn't define it. So there's a corridor that's been recognized of about 60 feet that they're in. So there was a question, or comment relative to the location of that. When we originally designed our locations prior to this submittal, we had met with them and inquired upon them what did they need for clearance over the pipeline and adjacent to it. And we were told they basically need to get a vehicle that would go along to be able to maintain it. And so what we came to was we would at least make sure that we had enough room to have the equipment centered over the pipeline, and then enough area to store materials or excavation within that area wherever we put the stormwater. The comment has come back that they will probably, their final email to us will condition it that if for some reason they need more storage area over there and they impact that storage area, then we're responsible for restoring it, which we're okay with.
Okay. And your pavement does not go over the pipe itself, it just goes over the easement?
It does not go over the pipeline. That's the same limits of pavement we had on the original design. One of the comments were that they were concerned relative to the fact that we don't have that yard to the west side of the building anymore. On the prior configuration, we had a rack that was on that side of the building, and plus there were going to be a couple bays where we could pull maintenance of boats in. So that was an area that we would need to operate in and temporarily put boats and whatnot in. Well, now it's only going to be a travel through for vehicles or for the marine forklift to turn into the building. And as part of the comment back to them, we gave them the fire truck routing that we've done for fire rescue through that area that shows that it will stay on the pavement. And we've also showed that a tractor trailer truck can make it through that area and stay on the pavement. And marine forklift can come over and turn into the building and turn out without going off the pavement. So that was part of the reply to that comment. And lastly, typically they like to see the buildings now held back 50 feet from pipeline locations. We are a little closer than that. There are two pipelines. One's a pipeline that's not currently being used but is there for blowing product through, and the other one's what's called a cathodic pipeline. It's there to protect the other one for corrosion and all that. In lieu of meeting, there's a federal standard for that 50 feet that they typically like to see. We're closer than that. In lieu of meeting that, there's a minimum requirement that you have additional cover over the pipe in those instances. And so there's criteria relative to whether your pipeline is going through like a field area, that's 30 inches. If you're going through next to an industrial area that there's no traffic or a residential area, it's 36 inches. Well, if you have a building closer, then they want to see another 12 inches over that. So we're required to have 48 inches of cover. When we did the initial approval for the parking in that area, when we had the boat storage, we had done a calculation for the district that showed that even if we put a tractor trailer truck on that based upon the thickness of the pipe and all that, there would be no detriment to that. Well, that pipe, that calculation was based upon a minimum 36 inch was what we had determined was there when we did inspections prior to that calculation. With the plan that we're doing now, we're adding more than 12 inches above that, so we meet that criteria. So we're waiting to hear back. Ken was on vacation last week and has not gotten back to me on it. Okay?
Okay. On the board, anybody else have questions?
Yeah, I agree with Will's memo that I have a concern with not having a safety barrier railing over the retaining wall. I know that you think you're going to have just employees there, but even they could take a tumble, and I would think you'd want to guard against that. But also, who's to say the public's not going to somehow wander in there at some point in time, and if some little kid fell over there, you know, it'd be a big liability on your part. So since it's a safety issue, and I think would help you out as well, I kind of would like to see a safety barrier railing over that wall.
We'll defer to the board on that. You know, we can put, you know, a split rail fence or something, you know, along there.
Okay.
And then the only other question I have is the pictures you have of that you had of the building that were here a minute ago.
Yeah. Sure. At the last meeting, one of the things that you wanted to see was to see some color on it. We basically, it's a gray tan color for the building, and then the windows, around the window area, that's a bronze color. And what the architect has done is shown you a couple examples on the bottom, on the plans that you have, of projects that they have completed or designed in the past. This is with your architectural feature in the front, you know, a New England barn type deal, the gable, and this is actually a restaurant down at Port Harbor Marine in South Portland, which they did for the client. Very good architect, you know.
So that's what it'll look like.
Kind of, yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep.
Kevin? You muted.
That's okay, because I didn't have anything to say.
Any other
I'm
questions? You're okay. Ed, you okay?
Yeah, I just have a question. How high is that retaining wall going to be? It looks like from the contours here, it's only a couple feet. above ground.
Varies from, I think, 4 to 8.
Is
4 to 8.
Oh, well, it's,
Yeah. It definitely goes up to around 8 feet, so that's why we made the comment about some sort of barrier there. It doesn't have to be a guardrail, I don't think, because it's not like there's cars up there. It's just something to make people aware that there's a 8-foot drop off.
Mhm.
So in my opinion, I mean, Rob mentioned a split rail fence. That would be adequate as far as I'm concerned. It's just,
Does OSHA have anything to say about that, since he says it's a work environment?
Or your insurance company.
yeah.
Yeah.
well,
Yeah,
it's agreed to, so that's fine. All right. So now, Rob, I was just trying to look through. I know you told us about the waiver of this parking. I'm still I'm still kind of, I want to make sure we do this correctly.
I think at the last meeting, we talked about having
waiver.
reviewed that before and basically agreed to a lower parking amount. So
Yep.
I think we had determined that we didn't need a waiver.
Right.
I guess the question, and I don't have my ordinance book in front of me, but
You want one?
whether we really need that waiver or not.
All right, so, I mean,
Basically, they've provided an alternative, what I would call an alternative parking requirement based on the use.
yep.
And
And storage facility does not have a parking requirement, right? So,
Right, I mean, the Raymond ordinance is very general in terms of parking requirements. They list it for, you know, a building, basically. A lot of other ordinances have specific requirements, so they'll go in and they'll have a requirement for office, requirement for restaurant, a requirement for, you know, most ordinances don't necessarily have a requirement for storage buildings. So one alternative is to go to a reference like the ITE Parking Generation Manual or something like that. But there's so many different types of storage. It's, you know, which one do you use? So, I mean, to be, if you want to put it to rest, I guess maybe a waiver would be the right way to do it.
that's what I was thinking.
Rather than saying, and go through those 5 criteria and just say, okay, requesting a waiver, go through those 5 criteria, make sure they meet the 5 criteria, and then we've covered it.
Because even for the number of spaces, we would need the waiver just for our, whatever we call those things. The pylon, right? Don't we?
There was an
Islands.
requirement, but we waived that.
We waived it, but
Yeah, I mean, again, with such a small space, a small parking lot, I mean, they've
yeah,
provided.
no, I agree. It doesn't make sense, but I think
significant-
we could roll that into the waiver as well
Good,
and take care of the whole package.
Yep.
Let's just do it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Agreed. Agreed. Kevin? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
All right. All right. So so the 2 big items, and we have not, in the past, I don't see us changing this right here, is granted an approval for a project with the outstanding DOT, DEP, stormwater, and all those, which I know you're aware of. But as far as the rest of the project goes, I believe everything is met, right?
Yes.
Is that everyone's consideration?
Yeah, would this be just a preliminary approval?
Yeah, yep. So we could do either one, you know, up to the board. We could either table until the next meeting, when whenever that is and all the data comes back in, and then go to approval. If in fact everything looks good, we could do preliminary approval with all of the contingencies waiting on coming back. Normally I would like to do a waiver first before we did that, but we can't do the waiver because we don't have it in writing and all those written yet. I'm going to leave it up to you guys what you would prefer.
I guess
to
I'm
do.
curious how much it would delay the project if we waited a month.
Well, it's not going to delay the project at all because we will not approve the project until we get the stormwater and DOT.
Then I think we should wait.
Just wait as
Should
table
we- Yeah,
and wait.
table, right. I think we should.
Yes?
I'm okay with that.
You're okay with that? Kevin?
I'm good with that.
Will, is that,
I think that makes sense.
okay, wow. All right,
So the only outstanding item is to come up with the language for the waivers and the approvals that we need.
yeah, I think it would just be better to do it as a waiver, just as a package,
Yeah,
so we have that cleared up. And in that waiver, make sure you address the islands.
Yeah. That's cool.
Okay, all right, then we need a motion?
Move to table, you,
So we don't know exactly when that's going to be because we don't know
Right.
when you're going to be able to submit your permits.
I'm going to sit on the doorstep tomorrow.
Okay, so
Good
we'll,
luck with that.
I'll let you know how that works out.
so is there a second on the table? A second to the motion? Second, okay.
Second.
So the discussion would be, Rob, we'll say tabled until a timeframe where you have all those other documentation.
Until we get that, and then we resubmit, and then we'll,
Right, and the first order of business would be the waiver.
Right.
Okay, is there, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Done.
Rob.
Sandy, is that you?
Yeah. I just want to let Rob know if he's going to shoot for September. I
Oh.
need it a week from today. So chances are that isn't going to happen. He's laughing at me.
No, he's laughing with you.
Right? Yeah, I know, because I'm thinking, you know, I don't see DEP getting him that by next week.
Yeah, that's, yeah, that might or may not happen. Okay. Any staff communications or updates? We have real staff communications here. So the last item is item number 5. I think we need to discuss that fairly lengthy.
Well, before you adjourn, Bob, unless Rob comes
Yeah,
back.
what's Andy?
Unless Bob comes back by, Rob comes back by next week, nothing else has come in.
Oh, for next meeting. Oh.
Yeah.
So nothing better come in. We get a month off.
I thought you might like to hear
We
that.
will treat that.
And also,
We will consider any earlier submissions.
one more thing before we adjourn.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, one more from?
From Comprehensive Plan Committee.
Oh, okay.
The Comprehensive Plan Committee is going through chapters that's being written by the planners, and we're reviewing them and so forth. And part of what we got to do is interview staff from the town, and the only one that hasn't been interviewed yet is you. So someone will be contacting you just to
Okay.
interview you about concerns or any issues to do with the planning board that might concern the Comprehensive Plan Committee. So
So now specifically with you.
yeah, it'll be with me, unless you don't want me there. It'll be me and Sean McKillop.
That's fine. Just give me a call.
Okay.
Bill's already gone.
Second, the motion to adjourn.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Hey,
Oh.
sorry. Sorry, I got kicked. I don't know if you guys had anything you wanted me to talk about.
Too late. We just adjourned.
Okay, that's fine with me.
Thanks for stopping in, though, Al.
I was here, but I literally got kicked right as you guys were voting on the last thing or making your decision.
No, I think we're okay. Unless you have anything you need to tell us.
No, not really. I don't
Okay,
really have anything
have a
for
good
an
evening.
update. All right, you too.
Thanks, Alex.